mais ça marche? OK.
C'est bon.
Good morning, everyone. Let me introduce you to Marie Ekland today. The reason we wanted Marie to introduce this roundtable on avoided emission is because her true convictions on what and how investment should contribute to the environmental and social transition. She can back her views on a tremendous track record on private equity during the tech transition. So she detected Criteo. Then in 2015, she founded Daphne, then co-founded France Digital, and more recently, she founded 2050, an evergreen fund. Marie, would you like to explain us what 2050 is about, and why are you so convinced avoided emissions are key in the transition?
Sure, thanks for having me. I think I learned really two important things in my whole career about investing in venture capital. That was like 25 years of investment and managing money. And what you realize when you do that is that money is power. What I mean is that when you invest, you're absolutely not predicting the future. You're shaping the future. It's very different. If you decide to invest a lot of money in companies that will bring society that way, there's way more chances that the society is actually going to go that way than if you put the money to go that way. Right? So there's a lot of responsibility when you invest, which is not only about earning money, but about the society you're contributing to build. Right? And the second thing is that when you look at how finance works today, it's very much working as machine learning or artificial intelligence, meaning you look at past historical data and you look at what has worked meaning gaining a lot of money, and then you make decisions today based on this past historical data in a way that is overfitting, meaning that is optimizing in how you make decisions, the decisions that potentially will work even better. And all the data we have is mostly on finance. So all the investments we're making are mostly based on financial performance. And this is the reason that I believe we will not be able to fuel the sustainable transformation based on the way the current decision-making is done in finance. And what we have to do is just do the opposite, meaning look and question and decide what is the compass, what is the society we want to build, what do we want money to contribute to, and then look at what are the problems today that are preventing us from going there. What are the solutions that we actually know are the ones that are the best suited to make that happen, and invest in that. So instead of being past-looking, because then we will only reproduce the past, well, we should be forward-looking and back-casting and making decisions today based on that. Right? And this kind of shift of mindset is very important to make. And when you make it, which is what we did in 2050, this is exactly why it's named 2050, well, what you realize is that if you want to actually make that, we decided our goal, or North Star, is to build a fertile future. Meaning a future where we want everyone to be able to eat enough, eat healthily, to live and produce in a sustainable way, to also have everyone be able to take care of their body and mind on a daily basis, to be able to make everyone empowered in the way that they can change the education and cultural model in such a way that everyone can contribute and put trust back in the economy with financial models that are allowing long-term to happen, insurance models that are integrating all these risks into their model to make it happen, and information or media systems that are allowing democracy to function. So it's holistic. This is the one thing you realize when you start thinking that way, is that everything is interconnected. And then if you want to act, you have to understand that complexity, and you have to invest in value chains. Because one of the ingredients that are really necessary in the sustainable transformation is that it's not about one company transforming itself. It will not be able to transform itself if the whole value chain is not following. You know, you're depending on what your suppliers are doing, you're dependent on what your customers are doing with your product, and it has to be integrated. And so you have to think about investing in ecosystems, and then you also have to think about how you value things. You know, if we want to get out of this kind of, we only have financial data to back and assess what value is, then we need to invent what is the new benchmark of having a social and environmental performance. And this is where ESG fails us, because ESG has been built on risk. And so ESG is all about putting all these environmental and social risk back into a financial performance. But it's not about also questioning what is the value that we're contributing to on societal level, what is the value we're contributing on the environmental level, and it's everything is about also how can we provide positive impact and measure it. And this is when it becomes interesting, because we understand now that all these benchmarks need to be invented. You have a lot of impact frameworks around all the world, but some are on simple materiality. This is the US mostly. Some are on double materiality. This is more Europe. A lot of things are coming from practitioner, like IMP+. Some other are coming from United Nations. There's a lot of complexity in there that needs to be interoperable. But also, we need to understand how we translate these, how we measure things, but also how we translate that into a value that speaks to people. So does it have to be translated into money? Does it have to be translated into something that we personally value? Right? And one of the problems we have is, for example, tons of CO2 saved in the atmosphere doesn't talk to people. It's abstract, right? If you transcript that into, no, it's locally around my house, this is how the environment is going to be affected in the coming years, it will talk to your heart. It will talk in a different manner. If you translate into, this is how much it's going to cost to the economy, then it also talks to you in a different manner, but it also talks to you. So the challenge we have today is how do we make all these benchmarks accessible, comparable? How do we actually make them meaningful to people so that they can actually be proud of their performance, just like they're proud of a financial performance? And the first thing that we need to work on, and this is what we're working on right now, is carbon. Carbon is the one where we have the most things to do and to say. And everything around avoided carbon emissions is something that is new, because people are used to talk about scope 1, 2, 3, but not scope 4. And this is what we're here to talk about. And this is a huge stepping stone that we absolutely need to be successful on if we want the rest to follow.
And so before continuing on the roundtable, we do believe that one of the important things is that we have a clear and common understanding on what is avoided emission, what is the scope 4. And for this, I will invite here Laura Bollier.
Thank you.
So Laura is the CEO of Climate Dividends. She has real convictions on impact, on social and environmental transition and innovation. And she is now at Climate Dividend to drive the association towards more international scale and to drive more value on this. So please, Laura, thank you very much for sharing with us the newborn cartoon on avoided emissions, so that at least tens of people here get a real understanding on what it is.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maud, and thank you, Marie, for those very inspiring things. If you don't mind, I'll just... Okay. So this is the first quack. As you can see, you're not supposed to see both of those little things. But bear with me. So the idea is to try to understand what's the difference between I reduce my own carbon footprint and I avoid. I don't know how many people think that they're clear on avoided emission here. So that's some hands, but not many. So hopefully a lot more will be raised by the end. So, okay, so the cut is not good, as you can imagine, but let's focus on the above part. So we'll walk you through a very simple, kind of childish example, but hopefully that's useful. So you look at this guy, Mr. Bricks, who's an average brick producer. To produce this brick, he needs clay, he needs water, and he needs heat. And right now, what he's doing to have heat is that he's burning gas provided by whoever. That doesn't really matter right now. And so that process emits 0.24 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilowatts of heat. So that's quite polluting. And Mr. Briggs, because he's aware of everything that Marie says, thinks that he needs another solution today. And is looking at, okay, what's available? And how can he replace the most polluting thing of his value chain, which is the heat production? And so he comes up and sees that there's another solution, which is a heat pump that can provide heat, be integrated in the same process, but less CO2 emitted. And so he looks at those guys, Mr. Manufacturer and Mrs. Installer, who can provide the heat pump and replace it in his value chain. So that means now he can have heat that only pollutes 0.10 kilograms of CO2 avoided per kilowatt of heat. And so that means that from Mr. Briggs' perspective, this is really cool because he can reduce his own carbon emission. He can go away from 0.24 to 0.10 for each kilowatt of heat that he produces, that he uses in his process. So that's a 58% reduction per kilowatt of heat. So that's Mr. Briggs' perspective. But what about those guys, the Mr. Manufacturer and Mrs. Installer? Well, they didn't reduce their carbon footprint by selling the heat pump, because the heat pump that you saw is not made out of air or anything. It's a machine that they had to manufacture, that Mrs. Installer had to bring through her truck probably and install this. So all of this is polluting. But they helped Mr. Briggs reduce his own carbon emission. So from their perspective, they contributed to that reduction. So they're the one who are avoiding emissions. So we're talking about the same amount of carbon that is not being emitted, 0.14, so the difference between what was before and what is now. But from two perspectives, and Mr. Manufacturer and Mrs. Installer, they're contributing to avoiding those emission and to reduce their customer carbon footprint. And so what's really important to understand is that those guys, the solution providers, and that's exactly what Marie was saying, if we only assess them from the negative impact, well, that means they should stop selling heat pumps, because every time they sell a heat pump, they're polluting more. But here we see that this is a little bit stupid, if you accept the term, because every time they're selling a heat pump to a Mr. Brick, or even imagine someone that was using coal or something even worse, well, they're helping those guys decarbonize, and they're contributing to global carbon neutrality as a whole. So this is what we mean by avoided emission, is the solution providers that are contributing to help their customers and their users decarbonize. And I'll stop here. Hopefully that was useful. Can you all raise hand and say it's 100% clear, please? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Laura. So at KPMG, we have been working on avoided emission for some time now. But today we wanted to focus on this topic because this needed this type of clarification for everyone. And also because it's still emerging and we are sure that it deserves to be pushed forward. So thank you for being here. Why do you think those emitted transitions are so crucial for the transition? We do believe that if we want to accelerate the change, we need to move behind a vision limited to risk, a vision limited to banning the companies which are emitting more. We now want to bring more optimism on the table, more positivity. So for that, we need to identify these business models, these products, these activities, which are helping avoiding emissions on the value chains. So for that, we believe that just as the level of emission is an indicator of the risk level of a business model, that it's an indicator of the probability that a business model is going to be a stranded asset in the short term. We do believe that avoided emission can be the right KPI for resilience and then for long-term growth. So this is why today we are here. And now I think I will leave it to Clément, who is the person at KPMG leading the avoided emission subject, and with our guests.
Thank you, Maud. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Laura. Please Thank you everyone for your attention. Thank you for being interested in this topic. As you know and you see, this is a very hot topic today. A lot is needed, a lot of urgency. We're talking 500 gigatons before we hit the 1.5 degree above pre-industrial levels. If we go with the nature-based solutions, if we go with carbon capture solutions, we're not meeting this urgency. So this is why we're here today, to put emphasis on those avoided emissions. And I would like to start introducing our guests today, those who have not been introduced yet. But I start with Camille Richard. Camille Richard is the head of sustainability at Back Market, the first marketplace dedicated to refurbished tech and the reduction of the environmental impact of electronics. For more than 10 years, she has dedicated her career to environmental transition. And previous to Back Market, you worked at Sustainable Performance at Suez on an international waste and water recycling company, Brazil, Mexico, to name a few. And you received in 2021 the Hub 35 Sustainable Award from the Hub Institute. So very happy to welcome you, Camille, around. Mathieu, on the corporate side, client of KPMG as well, and Mathieu Tollion is climate director of the Sustainable Development Team at Veolia. You all have heard about Veolia, so he joined Veolia in 2022. He has worked in different positions and on a large range of projects, including pioneering the ecosystems and biodiversity strategy of the group, as well as managing a sustainable urban planning, and now heading all the avoiding emission efforts. I'd like to continue with Ludovic. Ludovic, very much welcome. Ludovic is, along with Laura, the two initiatives we've been following for about 1 or 2 years now. In their first steps, Ludovic is a dual French and German citizen, and he founded in Riverse, a company called Riverse, in 2021. Drawing upon his experience in leading corporate strategy and investments and pioneering carbon crediting program. He will explain a little more in a few minutes. And thanks to their initiative, the Certified Industrial Decarbonization Project on using the voluntary carbon market. Technical, but now I'm handing the mic to Ludovic to explain a bit more what those green techs are about, how much we're talking in terms of decarb, what is Riverse.
Thanks a lot for that, Clément. And hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, Riverse is a carbon credit certification standard and platform on the voluntary carbon market for European circular economy projects. The foundational idea behind Riverse is that all the technologies to meet our 2030 climate targets, they already exist. Should it be low carbon energies, low carbon construction materials, refurbishing and recycling processes, carbon removal technologies, etc., etc. But in almost all cases, they massively lack financing to scale and get the impact required if we want to meet these 2030 climate targets. Carbon credits are a perfect mechanism to bridge that financing gap. In fact, carbon credits are a way to value avoided or removed emissions to get financing for these technology providers. But on the carbon market, there were no methodologies that were effective to certify these industrial decarbonization projects in Europe, as most of the market is notably focused on nature-based or renewable energy projects, usually in the global south. So we've been investing a lot the past 3 years now in developing science-based methodologies to allow these technology providers to issue carbon credits on the carbon market to finance their technologies and scale. And by doing so, we are creating a new class of carbon credits on the carbon market that are issued by industrial decarbonization projects in Europe. And these credits are highly related to the value chain and the geography of the end buyers of carbon credits. And that's allowing for relevant insetting and offsetting strategies. I guess we'll probably be getting into that in the future. But basically, if I sum it up, the idea is to value financially avoided and removed emissions by industrial decarbonization projects to help them scale and get financing to get the impact required.
Thank you, Ludovic, for this initiative. I'll hand over to Laura. Laura, can you, on the same explain a little bit what climate dividends is today, how the idea took shape, please?
Okay. Thank you very much. So basically, carbon credits is an extremely interesting mechanism that enables you to, as a financial asset, to have more revenues and to secure impact. What we're looking at is very complementary, is how do we get investors to invest in equity in those climate solutions that are decarbonizing? Because if you think about it, if you're an investor, if you invest in a climate solution and that you want to be able to claim or at least to value the positive contribution of that climate solution, if you have to buy a carbon credit in addition, it's kind of double time paying. You have to invest in equity plus buy the carbon credits. So that's not really fair, and I mean fair, but above all, it's not going to scale because investors don't want to pay twice, and that's normal. I mean, they're financial people. They don't want to pay. They want to pay as little as they can, and that's normal. So what we look at is how can you trace back this positive climate contribution to investors. So a climate dividend is basically the mirror of a financial dividend for climate. When you have a positive climate contribution and through your activity, whether it's through the sale of a product in a general way or through the sale of carbon credit, then if you want to circle this back and value this back to your investors, you can distribute climate dividends. So for each ton of CO2 avoided or removed, you'll be able to issue and to distribute a climate dividend to your shareholders. And by default, it's at the pro rata of detention of capital like you would do. So what's interesting to understand is that it's an extra financial information. A climate dividend is not something that you monetize in itself. You're not selling it. It's a standardized, exactly in that sense as carbon credit, but it aims to be a standardized measure of that positive contribution. And then it also, the bet, what we're aiming at, is that ultimately it will increase the valuation, the financial valuation of companies, because it will be more attractive for investors to be a company that generates climate dividends rather than a company that doesn't do anything for climate, doesn't generate climate dividend.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Laura. And I'd like to hand over to Back Market and our two major corporates today. I'd like to hear you a little bit on how are avoided emissions taken into account at Back Market? I know it's been a long story, and we're talking about impact by design. Can you walk us a little bit through what are avoided emissions for Back Market today?
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much for the invitation. I'm super happy to share the stage with all those avoided emission geeks. Yes, so Back Market, as you explained a bit, it's a marketplace dedicated to refurbished electronics. So the idea is every time we sell an electronic device refurbished, we actually avoid the manufacturing of a new one because there is like a very small rebound effect with technology, like you don't have 5 smartphones in your pocket. So the idea is to promote circularity in tech. And the luck we have at Back Market is that we are an impact by design company. So every time we sell a refurbished electronic device, we actually contribute to avoid carbon emission every time. So we are monitoring this. It's actually taking a huge place in our business model, in our company's philosophy. We have been lucky enough to work with the ADEME, the French Agency for Environmental Transition, that we were actually presenting this report 2 years ago in this same place at Change Now. So we are now able to actually quantify very precisely the benefits brought by the circular tech for the planet. And we are trying to integrate this the more we can in the way we are actually piloting our performance today.
Thanks, Camille. And just to give Camille, just keep the mic for a second, but can you give the audience a little bit of example for 1 ton of CO2 on your supply chain? How many emissions you're avoiding for your customers?
Yes, of course. So we have the quantification of this impact thanks to the ADEME report. So for 1 smartphone, when you choose a refurbished one over a new one, you are actually avoiding 77 kilograms of CO2, which is more or less the equivalent of 400 kilometers by car. We are talking with Marie about how we are actually trying to give an idea to people. It's one of the big questions we have at Back Market, to make people understand that you can have a very concrete impact with a very small choice of consumptions. And this is actually true for a bunch of products.
And this is important because some of the companies are focusing on their emissions, on their carbon, on their supply chain, but sometimes their impact by design will just have a lot more impact on their clients, on their users, by the product and solutions they provide than on their own supply chains. Of course, they have to do the supply chains effort at the beginning, but then the rest will come after, and the emission saved will be a lot more important. This is the case of back market. Thanks, Camille, and I'll hand over to Mathieu, who has a different journey a little bit with Veolia. Can you walk us a little bit as to how avoided emissions are being slowly but progressively more and more taken into account at Veolia?
Yes, thanks for having me. Veolia, as a services company, has been an early adopter of avoided emissions. So we have been disclosing since more than 10 years in our sustainability reports avoided emissions. To give you a few examples of what that represents within our activities, it's mainly linked to our activities in the field of energy and waste. So for energy, thanks to Lola, it will be easy to explain, because basically we are the one providing to Mr. Briggs a low carbon solutions. And in the waste business, by doing energy recovery when we incinerate waste, and as well as sorting and recycling waste, we are contributing to provide a low carbon energy or secondary raw material that are emitting less carbon than primary products that use virgin materials. So we have a within our carbon footprint, we have a total of 15 million tons of CO2 avoided each year, which is a less interesting ratio than back markets, because on the other side, we also emit more than 60 million tons of CO2. But not every company has the chance to generate avoided emissions. So that's really something we want to value and acknowledge more and more. And that's what we are working on.
So here you have an impact not by design, but kind of environmental services already, and sort of an impact by design, but maybe not in the same rank, at least as back market, but still a lot of emphasis, and a lot of the next plan for Veolia really focuses on avoided emissions. So thanks, Mathieu. And before handing over to our two initiatives, I'd like to ask you, Camille, what do you see as today major challenges you'd see for avoided emissions to be recognized per se, to have maybe the emphasis that's needed to have and meet the urgency that's needed? What would be your position and your take on that?
Yes, I think we need urgently a common framework. Yeah. I think everybody on the stage agree with that. I don't know if you are familiar with the SBTi, Science-Based Target Initiative. Is actually an organization that validates your trajectory for carbon reduction. And this kind of organization, which is great, but they are not recognizing avoided emission. So for a company like us at Back Market, like, the more we grow, the better impact we have. So we need a framework that actually recognizes our positive impact, but at the same time incentive us to improve our own impact, the impact we actually generate as any company, as any human, living being. So we need to be incentivized by that. And today, as Back Market, we are not really incentivized to actually have a reduction trajectory. So you were mentioning this, Mathieu, a bit earlier, but what we are working at Back Market right now is what we call a carbon P&L, meaning that we are looking at the emission we avoid, we contribute to avoid, and the emission we generate, and we are trying to improve this ratio. So there's a way we have found to actually be accountable for the negative impact while improving the good impact we have. But this kind of trajectory needs to be recognized by international framework, and we want to be SBTi. We want to actually have to be accountable to have actually a 1.5 degree trajectory. But for that, we need our avoided emission, the one we contribute to to actually be recognized. And I have been told that the GHG protocol, which is an international organization defining the methodology of carbon accountability, needs to recognize this COP4, so this is a call. If there's anyone working with the GHG protocol, we need to have a meeting with them very soon.
Thank you, Camille. And I'd like to, Ludovic, answer a little bit as to some of the works you guys have done together to just value a little bit some of those avoided emissions. And how would you answer and explaining a little bit what you've done, what Camille is saying? How is Riverse answering that?
Yes, so we're actually working with back market and their supply chain. In the refurbishing supply chain, if you look at the suppliers, so the people that are actually refurbishing the electronic devices, it's incredibly low margin businesses with incredible complexity to actually operate the refurbishing. So for example, having access to the material that you'll refurbish is a huge nightmare. So low margin, lots of complexity in the value chain. So it's businesses that we need to finance to help them scale. And so we've worked on a partnership with Back Market. We have developed with Riverse a methodology to basically be able to certify avoided emissions from refurbishing of electronics on the voluntary carbon market to issue carbon credits. And the end goal with that basically is to allow notably the suppliers of Back Market to be able to issue carbon credits and get financing for that because they need to get money basically to scale the activities. And as long as this framework you're mentioning basically doesn't exist to harmonize the way you basically compute first and then value avoided emissions on the market, there needs to be voluntary initiatives to foster that and enable the scale of the technology because we need to invest now with them if we want to get a future that is more or less livable. So that's the first part, creating the model. And then the second part, of course, on the quantification. So we are working on quantification models to allow to compute first these avoided emissions. It's quite complex because you need to take into account the project scenario. So what the refurbisher, for example, will basically emit with its solution and processes and then compare with the baseline scenario. So understanding what the business as usual would be basically. And so creating those models is quite complex. And so that's why we're putting a scientific team on that to develop those models.
So can you talk a little bit about LCAs maybe? Because I don't know if that's pretty much comparative LCA that you are referring to with a project scenario versus a reference scenario. But
that's getting to the geek part of the session that you were mentioning. So yeah, the way we basically compute avoided emissions is doing indeed what we call comparative life cycle assessment. So life cycle assessment that we call cradle to grave is a way of computing the environmental impact, so carbon, but also other dimensions of environmental impact of solutions, notably from the raw materials that you get to the end of life of the product. And so what we are building in the quantification models is comparative life cycle assessment. So understanding the life cycle assessment of the project, in that case, for example, a refurbisher, and compare it with the what we call baseline scenario. That is basically the business as usual scenario if the project had not occurred. And it's by comparing these two scenarios that you basically get the avoided emissions and the computation of those that you can then certify to financially value them.
Thanks, Ludovic, for the explanation. I'd like to hand the mic to Mathieu. We've heard a lot about financing. Those initiatives have been putting more emphasis on how to value those avoided emissions. We see finance as being a challenge still within the firm. How is Veolia? How are you, Mathieu, trying to put more attention of your responsible on avoided emissions? What do you see as still being a challenge for you today that you have to solve in terms of financing?
Yeah, so as I said before, we have been communicating a lot on avoided emission, but it was like a nice to have. It was a way to educate people on what we were doing through the climate lens. But now, at last, we've switched from an era where the most important was to have a good accountability and to being transparent about our carbon emission. Now we have to really cut by 50% our carbon emission in the coming 10 years. So it's really important for us to acknowledge what our activities, in what way our activities are also contributing to the ecological transformation. That's the first point. And the second is that we are positioned on it's a huge market business opportunity for us. So we also want to to get some more finance, some more investment in the solution we provide in order to not only develop our activities, but also to contribute more and more to this ecological transformation. So we want this avoided emission to be more recognized within the ESG ratings and in the investment frameworks. And as you were saying, we need to have a standard for that, because today we also have some recommendations to calculate them. They are becoming more and more robust, but there is still a way of doing this the way you want, which is not good for the credibility of avoided emission. So the faster we will have a standard for this, the faster it will be adopted and really embedded in all the investment decisions.
Today, the financing you mentioned to me separately, but you're pretty much like raising funds, or you're having funds injected. But is it easy for you to link impact and the funds you raise or you get for your ESG projects, whichever they are, to finance and orientate and channel the cash or the debt towards those higher impact, higher avoided emissions projects? Is it still a challenge for this part for you today to have this signal kind of thing to show that this is the project we have to finance because it has a higher impact than other projects? Do you see this as an easy task today?
No, it's not, because we are still being assessed through the risk side. What is your footprint and how we manage to reduce it, but we are not assessed on the opportunity side. And how we contribute to the ecological transformation, what are the positive externalities to what we do. So obviously it's not working. And if I add to this all the administrative and legal complication that we sometimes have or face to deploy some solutions, it's really complicated.
Thanks, Mathieu. I'd like to hear Laura on how is climate dividends answering to this challenge.
Well, it solves everything, of course.
Or to give
No, but it's very interesting. We work with very different companies, from startups to big corporates and SMEs. And I think we can see kind of different challenges that we could categorize in some way. You'd have the cases of companies like Back Market, which are really impact by design, and so I kind of very frustrated. Okay, if we can't value our actual positive contribution, and especially to financial institutions, then it's completely contradictory to what the core of what they're doing. And so in that sense, having both the standardization, of which everyone talked, is super important, but I really think also integrating it into the financial logic and the financial rationale is really important. Because, for example, I think most of you know B Corp probably, and so B Corp did a good job at rationalizing and standardizing something, very few impacts, but as far as I know, and I'm not an expert of B Corp, and I really think it's a super good initiative, I'm really not trying to say it's not, but it's not yet something that is integrated into a financial rationale for investment or anything. And so the standardization is one thing, but the actual financial valuation and changing what, exactly like what Marie said at the beginning, what do we value, what do we put a price on, because today valuing something means putting a price on it, is really, really important. So what we try to do at Climate Dividends is really to work on two things at the same time. Is, yes, we need avoided emissions to be more standardized, because if they're not going to be valued. But if you don't find the right mechanism to make them valued, well, people don't have incentive to make them standardized. So you need to work on both of them at the same time if we want to make it through. So we have those cases, and then just what I wanted to say is that we see more and more companies that are not impacted by design, but that are trying to shift their business model towards new activities that are going to be more positively contributing. And for those companies, if those new climate-orientated solutions, activities, business units are not actually valued, and not just in image, but in actual financial terms at the end of the day, it's extremely difficult even for them to finance and to engage with their collaborators. So we also needed to transform, and it's not just for either startups or big corporates like Veolia that are already really well orientated towards those things. So I really think that the shift that's super interesting that we're seeing here is really moving away from an impact approach to a value creation and look at, okay, how do we create value that is not just economic, but that's climate? And if we want this to be valued, maybe one day we'll just say, oh, climate value is enough, that's good for you. Well, I hope that appears, but we're quite far from this. So today we need to find ways of linking this climate value to the only thing that we know, which is financial terms in some way.
Thanks, Laura. And we wanted, with this, we'll go to the conclusion, but we wanted to give you a little bit of understanding of those two initiatives trying to solve financing issues around those avoided emissions, which are needed today if we are to stay within these 1.5-degree boundaries. So we have here a way to signal investors for the same euro they invest, they have one climate dividends on the back of that. So this is one way to do it. We have here Riverse, who's addressing it through monetizing some of the impact companies have and avoided emissions have to finance those projects. Certain green techs, for having worked with them, avoid 30–40% of emissions compared to the existing scenario today, the reference scenario. So we're talking not planting trees, we're not talking about, like conserving or carbon credits in the other side of the planet. We're talking about all the solutions, because those ones, nature-based solutions, can be limited physically. We're talking about all the solutions today existing, which need financing, which need to be signalized a little bit. So I'd like to give you the micro for wrapping up this session, and thank you all for being around with me today. But one wish for 2024. Laura, since you have the micro, you can go on.
That's not a good present. One wish for 2024, linked to avoided emissions, I imagine.
You're launching the second cohort, I think.
No, I think having more and more people that understand what avoided emission is would be a really good start, and that this is not just another reporting, but this is a change of paradigm that it's behind, and that let's talk about creating climate value and not just minimizing what we do badly. I think that would be a much more exciting way to drive the transition, even though there's not just carbon, there's not just this, but that would be quite of an exciting move for 2024.
I'm going to repeat myself a bit, but I'm a bit obsessional with this topic. Yes, I would say the kickoff meeting for the recognition of Scope 4 by the GHG protocol would be a nice gift. Yes, as you were mentioning, Ludovic, like there is a lot of value for all the supply chain with avoided emission. We are doing that for the refurbisher work and the platform, but there is still much to do, and we need to have this solid framework, because when it comes to impact, the smallest doubt can actually make all the system collapse. We have seen it with Vera and all the scandals with carbon credit last year, and this is a shame, like we don't have a system protecting these amazing initiatives. We are actually here to build a better future, and we feel sometimes a bit alone. So it's time to recognize the Scope 4.
Thank you. Mathieu, one wish?
Yeah, I would say that further to having a standard, as sustainability practitioner within the company, our job is to influence strategy, finance department to really integrate this into the growth plans of our companies, so they can really drive the growth where this is the most useful for the planet. But once this will be integrated in investment decision, this will circle back and help companies to drive even more fastly this transition. So that's really what we're expecting.
Thank you, Mathieu. Ludovic?
I'll bounce back on what Marie was saying at the beginning. We need a lot of evangelizing on that market. We need to create a really compelling narrative for avoided emissions. If I take my really own focus of carbon credits, as you mentioned, Camille, there have been like massive scandals and backlashes on the carbon market, for example, in 2023. Those were linked notably to what we call avoided emissions projects. And now what you see on the market is that basically all companies that were investing in the carbon markets are freezing. And there's like no climate action because people are afraid of what they call avoided emissions. And the few companies that still invest are looking for removal credits. Don't get me wrong, we need to scale carbon removal technologies and we need to buy carbon removal projects. But we need also massively and in the very short term to stop emitting CO2 in the atmosphere. Otherwise, things will not work. So we need to create a really compelling narrative around these avoided emissions and the projects that allow for them, basically, to finance them. And it's like really urgent. So that's my biggest wish in 2024. It was in 2023 already, so it will stay the same, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to have you on stage.